Well, hello. Welcome to One Man's Faith. My name is Neal, Owen, as you can see right there on the screen. And hey, I'm glad to have you with me. Sometimes it gets lonely up here. But I consider you my family, and I'm talking to you, and hey, it's good, isn't it? All right, and we're just now getting into a new year, 2016. What's it going to bring for you? Hopefully, and we'll be kind of looking at this a little bit today, it's going to bring some good stuff. It's going to bring some good stuff into your life. So, excuse me, what I want to do, since we're starting a new year, I want to go back and look at how the Bible is laid out. We'll kind of do this as kind of an introduction for the next couple of weeks. So often we don't think about how the Bible is laid out, and we don't really know what it's all about. Someone says, open your Bible to, and we do it, we just follow, and well, why? What's there? What's going on? Things like, what are the first 5 books of the Old Testament or of the Bible? What are the first 5 books? Have you ever thought about that? Do you know what they are? Okay, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's, for some, that may be, old hat. But Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are important books. Those 5 books are collectively called what? Well, there's at least 2 official names, the Pentateuch, which means the 5 books, and it's also the Torah. It's the law. Whenever you read where it says, and the law and the prophets, or the law and the writings, when it says law, it's talking about the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. Who were they written by? Why do I need to know that? Well, sometimes it's interesting to know and understand. They were all written by Moses, okay? And you can kind of tell because they ended when Moses died, so to speak. There was a little bit after that in Deuteronomy, but Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy were all written by Moses. Now, what do they consist of? You ever looked, if someone says, let's talk about Abraham, well, where would you turn? Okay, Genesis is the place you would turn. Genesis means the beginning. All right, in the beginning, the actual Hebrew name for the book of Genesis is Bereshit, which means the beginning. In the beginning. And so it has the beginnings of a lot of things. It has the beginning of the universe. It has the beginning of earth. It has the beginnings of everything on the earth, the veggies, all the creatures, all the seas, all the sea creatures, and man. Then it has the beginning of sin, where where man sinned. Then it talks about the peoples as Adam and Eve had children. They had Cain and Abel. But they also, if you'll read, it says, and they had many other sons and daughters. And then they had Seth, and Seth started what I call the God line that led down to Noah. But it's the beginnings of all the people that came from Cain and came from Seth, because Abel died. So if he had any relatives, it's not mentioned, but Cain's relatives are mentioned, and Seth's relatives are mentioned, and it gets down to the earth is populated, but it's not doing right, and we have the flood, and we have the outcome of the flood, and then Noah's lineage, and then we get to about chapter 12, and it starts talking about Abraham. There's a program called Walk Through the Bible, and it teaches you that that the first 11 books of Genesis is creation, fall, flood, nations. That's the first 11 books of the Bible. Okay? And then in chapter 12, we go to Abraham, and we go through the life of Abraham, and then we go into Isaac, and then we go into Jacob. And from Jacob, he has 12 sons, and Genesis kind of finishes with Joseph. Joseph being the 11th son, and he was taken in Egypt. And Genesis ends up with everybody in Egypt. Jacob and all his people, I think there were 70 at the time, moved to Egypt because of the famine that was in the land because of the drought. And they ended up staying there, and they ended up being slaves, which I believe is where Exodus starts off with. Pharaohs rose up after the one that knew Joseph and Jacob, and they became afraid of the people of Israel. And so they put them into slavery, and they had them build. And then it goes into Moses. And Moses rising up, and Moses running away because he murdered an Egyptian who was beating slaves. And God comes and says, I want you to go back, and I want you to tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And we have the 10 plagues in Exodus. And then we have them going out of Egypt into the wilderness. And God takes them to his mountain. And he gives them there the 10 commandments. He also gives Moses, he downloads into Moses his plan for the tabernacle. And they stay at the mountain, and they build this tabernacle, which was a mobile temple. And because it was going to be where God resided. And then Leviticus comes in, and this is all of the laws given by God, laws to live by, really. That's more or less what Leviticus is all about. And then it moves into Numbers, and God says, I want you to take a census of all the people so you'll know how many of each you have, because what God did, well, God's plan was he was going to allow or have the firstborn of every family be the priest, so to speak. They were going to be set aside. But in Numbers, something happens, and so God says, no, okay, the Levites will be. But any tribe that has more than the Levites has to redeem those firstborn. And so he sets up, he starts a census. He wants to know how many people. So we find out how many people. And then they get ready to move, and they send the spies into the promised land. And the spies come back. 10 of them said, oh, it's great, but 2 come back, Joshua and Caleb, and said, hey, it's great, and yes, we can take it. God is with us. And all the people went with the 10. We have disobedience because they wouldn't listen to God. And then God said, okay, you're going to wander till you die off. And so they wandered for 40 years. They were not going to go into the promised land. God was going to take their children into the promised land. And so that's basically Numbers. It's the wandering throughout the wilderness. And then Deuteronomy comes in. They come to the point where they're getting ready to go into the promised land, and God gives and has Moses write down the commands again. Deuteronomy means the second law, and it's kind of a reiteration and a little bit of explanation and expounding upon Leviticus, the previous book of law. Aaron and Moses die, and Joshua takes over. He becomes the BMIW, big man in the wilderness. He's going to be their leader. He's the one who's going to carry them into the promised land. And so that's a very short overview of what those books are, but they're important because they show what God did, that God is the creator of the universe, the creator of everything. And, I don't know why that's any harder to believe than to think there was a big bang. And all these things came out in a perfect round modules called planets. That's, when something explodes, it doesn't, it's not round. It won't, it just doesn't happen. God created everything. God created everything. And so we see that. We see what God's intention was. His intention was that we be His people and have fellowship and a relationship with Him, because that's what He started with Adam and Eve. He came and He walked with them at least daily, if not more than, more time than, just a couple hours or whatever. And He said, listen, everything here is yours. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. But don't eat of that tree. Don't eat of that one tree. And the adversary came in and deceived Eve and said, listen, God just doesn't want you to know everything He knows. That tree, the tree of good and evil, will make you like God. And he deceived her, and she saw it was good to look at. The fruit looked good, and just by sight and smell, it looked like a good tree. And then Adam let her eat of the fruit of the tree of good and evil, and we broke our relationship with God. And ever since, God has said, I am going to come back. I am going to redeem you so that we can have the relationship we were supposed to have had. And He starts to do that. And He develops a people who are His people who will carry forth His word. And that becomes Israel. And that's the start of it. Okay, hey, I got to take a break. Get a cup of coffee. I'll be right back.